My name is Paul. I'm the manager of the Woogatha Branch of the AWIS. I'm reporting to you today, Dr Thyme, on the 3 collaborative means by which we compiled the report which is now before you. First of these was Google Docs, which is hosted by Google Drive. It's a way of sharing documents so that a document can be simultaneously worked upon by numerous people. The maximum number of people who can allegedly work on a Google Doc is 50 people. They can edit, they can make comments upon, and they can share the document. We actually did comment on the side of the document, so that if something needs to be resolved, it's possible to make a little comment on the side of the document, and people can respond to that to resolve questions about approach or anything else which might arise in that document. We did find, though, that if 2 or 3 people were using the document simultaneously, that there were problems in which the document would freeze up or would slow down. Ultimately, we had very considerable problems with the document, which I'll go into shortly. Google Docs was initially great to use. It worked well. It was good to be able to keep track of people's progress because you can actually see if people are doing their required work on that document. We eventually had an issue, though, which arose several days ago, whereby the document would freeze up when attempts were made to change the document. It would then state that there was an error. It would demand that it be reloaded. Attempts to reload it would make no practical difference, because then attempting again to edit the document would result in another freeze, another error message, and another statement that it needed to be reloaded. It did give you the ability to report errors, and we did. All 3 team members reported the errors to Google. As of this point, 3 or 4 days on, there's still been no response from Google. Clearly, a very significant downside of using Google Docs is that it is hosted by Google, which is an external body, meaning that we have no control over it, particularly when errors like this arise. So consequently, it is something we generally regard as being worth recommending because it is good when it works, but it does have a very significant downside of there being no internal control over that by IT. Eventually, we had to do a save as on that particular document and forward it around by email to be able to complete it, meaning a complete failure of the Google Doc. We use Skype as well. Skype enables the ability to call or to video conference online. It's a free service, although there is a paid version as well. It allows groups of allegedly as many as 25 people to participate, and given we are a 25 branch service, in theory each member of the AWIS or each manager of the AWIS could actually use this as a group call. We used it solely through video conferencing. The problem we found, though, was that even with 3 people, there were very real problems with dropouts of the connection, of the sound or the picture. We had to set up a group in order to contact the 3 people simultaneously. It worked when all people could come online simultaneously. If somebody came late to the group, though, the problem was that somebody else would get put on hold or that connection would be lost. So that caused very real problems. There were also times when the connection would drop out completely for us all. There were also times when the sound would be so bad that it was quite impossible to hear one another speak. There was something going on with the audio that was not working properly, and that's one of the very real problems. That problem is that differences in versions of Skype, differences in internet speed amongst users all contribute to those kinds of problems. One benefit of Skype, though, was it's possible to share documents on the screen on the computer being used with the other users who can then see it in front of them, and that's quite worthwhile, again, as long as it works. We did find that it was a very useful way of communicating, particularly by video, because you can actually see one another. You know when other people aren't talking, so you can join in at an appropriate time, and for those reasons it was quite useful. we'd certainly recommend it, but we wouldn't recommend it as a replacement for a more formal video conferencing facility which might be more consistent. Lastly, we used Remember the Milk. I won't say much about it because we didn't really use it to any great extent, given problems we found with using it. Remember the Milk is a to-do list which sends out reminders. Those reminders can be sent by SMS or more typically by email. We found that it was not very intuitive. We had problems with trying to connect new members to it, and we found overall that we very quickly dismissed it as being a useful tool. I would think that something like Outlook, which does the same things, is probably much more intuitive, much more commonly used, and more likely to be more useful for the AWIS.